It's about a child murderer, and you can't picture a more horrible subject. And there is no violent scene in the picture. One of the most terrifying moments in the movie is when Peter Lorre takes a little girl of about 5 behind a bush. She's been bouncing a ball and he buys her a balloon. He takes her behind the bush and the camera holds on the bush and the ball rolls out and the camera pans up and we see the balloon floating up. Now, Fritz Lang said to me, if I could show the audience the horrible events that were happening behind the bush, it would not be as effective as what I did. Because what I did makes the audience create it in their mind. And the audience, each single person has a more horrible idea in their minds than I could ever put on screen. Those are words from director Peter Bogdanovich on Fritz Lang's 1931 film, M. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer. And each week I invite a guest on to discuss a film in the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about M. So a very quick synopsis of the film is Hans Becker, a serial killer who preys on children, becomes the focus of a massive Berlin police manhunt. Becker's heinous crimes are so repellent and disruptive to the city that he is even targeted by others in the seedy underworld network. With both cops and criminals in pursuit, the murderer soon realizes that people are on his trail, sending him into a tense, panicked attempt to escape justice. Tagline for the film is, it staggers the senses, shocks the imagination, it will leave you gasping. It is the sensation of 3 continents. The film stars Peter Lorre as Hans Beckert, Alan Widman as Frau Beckman, Inga Landgut as Elsie Beckman, Otto Wernicke as Inspector Karl Lohmann, and Theodor Loos as Inspector Grover. It's written by Thea von Harbo and Fritz Lang, cinematography by Fritz Arno Wagner, directed by Fritz Lang, and edited by Paul Falkenberg. Today I have back on Martin Kessler, who's been on the show before. He's a writer and filmmaker. He also hosts Pink Smoke podcast, but he's been on this show before to do Opening Night, the Cassavetes film. And we also did The Landlord, which is Hal Ashby. We actually did it for the Gordon Willis month. So now we're talking about M. Those are 3 big hitters, at least in my mind, they are. I'm very glad to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me back. I'm excited to talk about this film. I feel like we got a pretty eclectic collection of movies we've talked about going on, and I'm excited to keep it going.
So am I. I mean, I'll get into this after, because it ties into our collective film school days. But I am curious to hear how you got into Fritz Lang's work. Did his name precede his work? Did you know about him before you saw his films, or did you see his films and kind of get to know who he was through watching his work?
I think the images from his films preceded the work. I mean, I remember even before I knew who Fritz Lang was or any of the films, really just seeing the image of the robot woman from Metropolis.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was really into Star Wars, just seeing that referenced and, that image holds a lot of power, and it still does. And, there's so many iconic images from his films that you kind of recognize before you even see the movies. But, eventually I got around to seeing them and got into his work and, was just really fascinated, especially his early German films. I think there's just an energy to them, a power to the images, interesting stories. And I think the one we're going to be talking about might not be the most visually iconic, but I would say it's my favorite of his films. So I'm really excited to talk about M.
So am I. I feel like I agree. I'd seen a lot of imagery of his films before seeing his work, but oddly enough, this is where film school ties in. The first time I'd ever seen any of his films was M when we watched it in school. I don't know, you probably maybe had seen it before that, but that was the first time, and it just blew me
That might have been the first
away.
time I saw it too, actually. Now that you mentioned it, I hadn't really thought about it, but I probably saw it around that time or maybe in that class.
I can't remember which class it was, but I feel like it was first year.
I think it was, yeah.
Maybe like film art class. And I think the TA was like, "Oh, what was your favorite movie of the year?" And I was like, immediately, it was like my favorite. It just blew me away out of everything we had watched. Again, I kind of sort of remember stuff that we watched in that class, but I remember distinctly watching. Um, and from there, just kind of over the course of unnamed amount of years since then, been watching a lot of his work. And for the research for this, I was like, oh, looking at his filmography, I'm like, I've actually seen most of these. The only ones I haven't seen were some of the silents that I got to finally watch, again, courtesy of the library and renting the DVDs from there. So that's been very cool, especially because I got to watch the film that we'll talk about a little bit later, the film he does right before, um, which would be his last silent film. So, but we are here to talk about his 1931 film, as we mentioned, and I feel like there's a lot to say about this film. I feel like it's often considered a lot of people's favorites or one that for sure sticks with them. It is his first sound film, and this is after a long career of silent work and being a well-known director in Germany. And it's funny reading. I was gonna save this for the second segment, but I thought it would be good to bring it up at top, how he came about making this film. And UFA, released his previous film, Woman in the Moon, which we'll talk about later. And they asked Lang at this point, because it was gonna be released in the States, to add some sort of sound to it because they had the capability to do that. And they're like, at least add sound for when the rocket goes up, the ship goes up. And he was like, no. Which is so funny doing research about him watching interviews, reading interviews, and how he just like was very direct and just no bullshit type of guy where he was like, no, I'm not doing that. Um, and they're like, okay, well, we're not going to pay you if you don't do it. And he just held out and he's like, I'm not compromising. He's like, it would be too much of a shift in style that he personally didn't like. He kind of sort of compromised after by saying, the next film I do, I'll make in sound, but you guys can't have any say on it. You can't have any editing say, creative say, and you cannot interfere. Let me do it, and then I'm gonna give it to you. And he, because he's a little spiteful, it was like, well, I'm gonna make it about the most heinous crime you can think of. There's gonna be no love aspect, and it's gonna be dark. That's how M came about. Um, I know you mentioned you've seen at least some of his silent film, if not
Yep.
all or most. For you personally, how do you feel about that shift of the silent work that he did to M? Does it feel jarring to you? Does it feel seamless?
It does actually, to me, feel, I mean, in some ways it's a radical change, but it feels like a very smooth transition or a very artful transition. I think one reason why he was resistant to using sound initially, like in Woman in the Moon, is because at the time, a way that sound was being used was as a gimmick. I was
Mm,
thinking about that movie. Have you seen Lonesome?
mm-mm, no.
It's early sound film, and it's mostly like a silent movie, and they threw in a lot of gimmicks. There's like color and a sing along bit, and there's a talking scene where they just sit and talk, and it's really awkward, and it's just kind of like, hey, look, we can put sound in movies now. Is this great? So I think about initially the way sound was being used was just kind of to show that, hey, we can use sound now, and it's a lot like how you see sometimes 3D is used in movies. It's just
Mhm,
kind of there, and you're like, okay.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
for those who can't see, she's shaking her head.
I know. Don't get me
I
started
mean,
on that
well,
that era.
not to get like too far off, but I think the only 3D movie I saw that I thought really showed like artistic potential for the use of 3D was Jean-Luc Godard's Goodbye Language 3D, which
Okay.
some people might think I'm crazy, but just I remember the part where he splits up the cameras and you get this like iguana vision effect where your eyes
Oh.
are looking at completely different things. I'm like, okay, maybe there could be something to this. But going back to sound, I think Fritz Lang didn't want to use sound as a gimmick.
Mhm.
here's the rocket ship, you're going to hear the sound, kind of a thing. So, what really impresses me about M was just how sophisticated and how artful the use of sound is. The use of off-screen sound. It's not like, the thinking of, okay, if you see a cow, it's got to moo.
Yeah.
It's not that kind of logic. The way he uses sound in the film is very modern and integral to the story. It's a
Mhm.
major part of the story how the criminal is caught.
Mhm.
A lot of the motifs in the film are auditory and its use of silence also is very effective. The use of ambient sound, and then when it drops out and you get these moments of quiet, uh, it shows the artistic potential for sound. So I think there's a lot of things this movie does great, but I think you can say it's one of the first great uses of sound in a movie.
No, I agree, and I love that you mentioned the quietness of this because it's already a subject matter that most people don't want to be confronted with, despite the fact that it's something that we've is part of our society, and very much unfortunately, and it's hard to watch it in a narrative film without it being glorified, and this film very much does not glorify it. I think it's showing it very much matter of factly, and he talks about sometimes how he sort of went through, like, a documentary approach on this, and one of the interviews that I read with him, they ask him about the lack of music, and score, and he was like, "I personally don't like to use any music unless it's within the actual scene, and I don't use music to uplift any sort of drama. I'm not gonna use it during the action sequence. I'm not gonna use it when we're following said murderer to heighten things. The silence actually makes it more eerie, and every time I watch this, I'm always kind of like my heart's racing, even though I know what's happening, but it's just so tense, I think, to
Mhm,
sit in your own thoughts with this, and I think that's what this movie does, makes you sit in your own thoughts about what is going to happen to these kids and to him in this. So I love that, the balance of sound and silence. Uh,
mhm. Well, it's true. I mean, when you start using sound films, that means that silence becomes an artistic choice.
mhm,
I think that's something that this film is very savvy about, and I think that's one thing that differentiates it from a lot of the other early sound films. There's other great uses of sound too, but also like how fluid the camera work is. People talk
yeah,
about, oh, I think people sometimes oversimplify the story of the technical artistic development of the introduction of sound, saying like, at first, actors had to stand still because of the microphones, and
mhm,
it's really not true. If you look into it, there's a lot of films that used mobile cameras and figured out pretty quickly how to use boom mics and things like that. But
mhm.
it doesn't feel like the use of sound impeded the visual aspect of the movie at all.
I did wanna bring this up later, but I might as well bring it up now because it ties in really well. There is I do think this movie is quite visually stunning, but
Mhm.
I was always, really amazed by the camera work in this film, and me being someone who's purely just into a lot of history of film and not necessarily the technical parts. Not that I'm not interested in it, I'm just not as familiar with that aspect of filmmaking. There's a scene in this film where either downstairs, kind of in a basement, organizing how they're going to
The trial scene
before that,
before that. Okay.
it's when they're trying to organize and they're like, "You need to do this task to try and find the murderer,"
Right.
and the police come down and break it down, but the camera follows them down and, like, it's a one shot,
Yeah.
and I was
I
just
know the
like,
shot you're talking about. Yeah.
how did they do that
Yeah.
in this time? I have no idea, and I couldn't find anything on it. I just was, like, amazed. How did they do this when they don't have a Steadicam to do this? I don't know if it was a weird tracking shot down the stairs, how they could have possibly done that with those heavy cameras then. Um, I don't know, it just amazed me every time I see it, I'm like, and it kind of it's weird, maybe it takes me out of the scene a little bit, but in a good way where I'm just
Mhm.
like, I'm personally amazed by the camera work in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, visually, like you said, it is a striking film. And I think sometimes I feel like people overemphasize the reality, the
Mhm,
documentary nature of it, because it is still very stylized. It's not
mhm,
full on German expressionism or modernism, but it's still a modernist film. And like a lot of the visuals are really kind of weird and interesting. I think about like the shots of Peter Lorre being kind of framed by the reflection of these knives in sort of a diamond shape, or,
mhm.
when he's walking by the shop signs and you see the, weird spinning hypnotic look into the store window devices, or, even just when he's on the run and he's hiding, trying to hide in the shadows, hiding amongst all this junk. It feels like, okay, this is kind of the midway point between, Dr. Caligari and the post-war film noir movies. This is kind of right
Yes.
in the middle in between them.
No, I very much agree with that, and I do agree that it is very stylized in a perfect way, because I don't think that this is I know he was going for, in storytelling wise, like a documentary approach, but it's not. It's not shot like a docu-fiction, film at all, but the film's original title was supposed to be called Murderer Among Us. The and this is gonna come up a lot in a lot of the before and after stuff, but the Nazi party were like, "Yeah, no, you're not shooting this movie under that title."
Can I say I'm suspicious of that story? I know it's on like Wikipedia and everything, but like the Nazi Party wasn't in power yet, and I feel like, if you look at the source of that, it's from a Fritz Lang interview from like the '60s, and like he does kind of fluff up his
Mhm,
anti-Nazism a bit. I think, understandably why, but
mhm.
there's a few things that Lang says that are not entirely true if you really like look into the records, and I'm like a little bit suspicious that the title change was purely through
Them?
push
Yeah.
from the Nazi Party. What I heard actually when I was like digging a little bit more is that there were, I think, two other films that had murder in the title,
Okay.
and they just decided like M. I think there was like something might have been called like M Squad in English, the murder squad, which was investigating serial killings at the time, sort of like the
Mm,
precursor to like Manhunter type of things. And I think, it somehow came from that. But M is such a perfect title for
I
it. I
think so.
find, just like it has this sort of simple iconographic look to it when you see the poster with the hand on it, and it looks like just a symbol. Yeah, I'm just, love Fritz Lang, but I am suspicious of some of the things he says about, especially when it's like making him look like he was opposing the Nazis all the way back then.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up because I previously did a series on Douglas Sirk,
Mhm.
and also a German director who had to flee and went to the States, and it was his, biography, and his biographer would sometimes write asides to be like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure this didn't actually happen like that, but he's older now, I'll let him have that moment." Uh,
Yeah, like it's a little bit like that. I think, there's that great interview with William Friedkin
mhm,
talking to Fritz Lang, and a lot of what Lang says is verifiably not entirely true,
yeah,
but he tells it so well. Like, him
I
talking
know,
about his meeting with Goebbels, he's like, Mr. Lang, we decide who is an Aryan. And I'm like, he
yeah,
says it so well. Like, how can you not enjoy this story, even if
I
it's
know,
partly fabricated or maybe highly exaggerated? I think is probably the better way to think about it. But, also, I mean, Lang was Austrian
mhm,
coming to America. America was not necessarily that friendly to people from that part of the world at the time. Like I was reading about Bertolt Brecht, how hard of a time he had when he came to America. He was like labeled enemy alien, and
mm,
he had to be home at a certain time. He had a curfew, and he was just generally broke because he couldn't find work, and he was miserable. And I think Lang kind of threw him a bone by getting him to work on Hangman Also Die,
mhm,
which didn't really go well for Brecht in the long run. I know it ended up in like screenplay litigation,
Yeah.
where Lang actually testified on Brecht's behalf, saying like, yeah, he did most of the writing. A lot of the best stuff comes from him. And what I heard is that the Screenwriting Guild favored John Wexley. They said not necessarily because we don't believe that Brecht did a lot of the writing, but you're a foreigner and you're going to go back to Germany once the war's over, and we would rather credit an American who we know is going to stay in Hollywood and work in Hollywood. So that's why John Wexley was the credited screenwriter. I think it wasn't until like the Cohen Media Blu-ray restoration that came out a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, where they kind of put Brecht's name prominently with the film. But,
Yeah.
I think
Gosh.
like Lang was maybe a little bit more savvy about playing the game of like, yes, I've come here because I hate the Nazis and,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
necessarily just, yeah. And, he did hate the Nazis, but,
Yeah.
I think he was just playing the game a little bit to get on people's good side and look employable. I think, you had to be a little bit savvy to come from, coming from the German film industry and go to Hollywood at that time.
Exactly, without, changing your name too much to fit in to the American ideals to kind of mask yourself as being a foreigner. So, I do give him I'm sure we give him that grace of fluffing up some
I
of the
mean,
stories.
Thea von Harbo, who Lang was married to,
Mhm.
I mean, she was a Nazi, so,
Yeah.
and they, of course, split up, but, like, I think Lang probably, came to the stance he did a little bit later than he liked to make it sound. I
Yes.
think that was just kind of the nature of the situation. I mean, I was having a conversation with Christopher Funderburg a little while ago talking about how, if you had your artwork banned, if you were a painter and you were considered one of the degenerate artists that the Nazis
Mhm.
banned, it was kind of like a stamp of approval in the West. You know, if the Nazis banned you, you had to be cool. So you had
Yeah.
artists who would lie and say that they were banned under the Nazis just to kind of get that stamp of approval. So, I sort of see it a little bit like that. But
Mhm. Which is great.
yeah.
Well, that's not great,
Well,
but this ties it ties into something that we'll talk about later in the second segment
yeah.
because he talks about how those 2 films were supposedly banned, for different reasons or pulled out of circulation again for different reasons by said party. But I feel like when reading him talk about this film and his interest in murder on film and his interest in violence and how he portrays it, I think it's very interesting in this film. Even in his early silent films where we see, characters like, a Dr. Mabuse, and how we don't see necessarily those acts on screen, and how that works out for the better. So,
Mhm.
I usually just try and read 1 quote per episode. So, bear with me and the audience bear with me, but he said about, you know, not showing violence in M specifically, he goes, "At the time when I did M, it was 32, 31, and what can you show? You can show one thing, how a murderer rapes a child, right? Let me say he slits her up, right? Fine. A side that is very horrible to look at and very tactless. It is only one way and many people would look away. But if you don't show it, if you don't let the audience know what happened, then every single man and woman in that audience can imagine the most horrible thing that they can think of about it." And I think that's what he does. I
Yeah.
think, again, we talk about the silence and we talk about the way he styles the shots. We see something like a ball rolling. We know what happened. We don't need to see it. I think seeing it, I don't know that it glorifies the action, but it turns into something more sensational. And I think not seeing it is why this film is still discussed today. I think not seeing it is why this film still has an impact and why it had an impact then, it continues to have an impact, and why you feel so unsettled watching this film, and why it's still rewatchable as a film.
Yeah.
Because if we're seeing a child get assaulted on screen, I personally don't wanna watch that movie again, even if I think it's a very good film.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the lack of seeing violence, despite the fact that he knows and trusts the audience to put pieces together, the way that they want to put the pieces together, wherever their mind goes, and he lets the audience form their own opinion of what might have happened. That liberty that he gives to the audience that other filmmakers might not. They're like, I want you to see something specifically, but he thinks it more of as a kind of like a collaboration of uh,
Mhm.
minds.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely effective because when I watch the film today, it's not like a sort of film that I have to put myself in the context of the period. And, I mean, I love learning about the Weimar Republic and the time right
Mhm,
before Nazism. I'm into Berlin Alexanderplatz and all the art from
mhm,
that period and the movies, but I don't really have to think about that when I'm watching the film. I can just watch it as a straightforward crime story about something really awful and get absorbed into it. And part of it is because the film lets you fill in those gaps yourself. It has those ellipses that engage you and, let you use your imagination and, it makes the film really powerful and impactful. I mean, sometimes, it is impactful just to see a thing, but it's not easy to rewatch stuff like that. Like I always think about Alien 3, there's that scene where they do the autopsy on the little girl. It's like one of the
mhm.
hardest things I think I watched it in movies. So,
Yeah.
like I love those movies, but that's the one I rewatched the least, partly just because it's hard to sit through. So I, but you know, it's still disturbing and unsettling. It's just not obvious about it. It lets your imagination do the work, and even the aspect of like Peter Lorre's character being a pedophile. Like the film never has to say it. I don't even think they really insinuate it in an obvious way. It's just kind
Mhm,
of through the performance and through, it's something you kind of read between the lines and, that makes it still feel very mature in its subject matter and chilling and challenging. And I think it's really fascinating in how it approaches that subject and, how Laurie plays that character. And, I think how the film explores crime and punishment also
mhm.
makes it feel very timeless and relevant and, still fascinating, still compelling, because some of these questions that it asks about culpability, about punishment, about the death penalty, about justice are all things that are still relevant to today and still worth asking today.
Yep. Unfortunately, things have not changed much,
Unfortunately.
and it's interesting to me how, again, you mentioned they didn't have to outwardly say that he's a pedophile because that's
Yeah.
something as a audience of a certain age, you're just gonna know, and that's, again, trusting the audience to put 2 and 2 together. It's really not, it shouldn't be difficult to do. Also, I know at the time there was, like, a big murder case going on,
Yeah.
and so, the audiences at the time for sure would have been even more privy to it, but we're tracking back almost at this rate, going closer to 100 years later,
Mhm.
and there's obviously cases like that happening all the time, clearly,
Yeah.
in our news, and you don't have to telegraph things, you don't have to handhold the audience when it comes to something like that, where you just know what's going on through the imagery and you're smart enough to do it.
Mm.
And I think that's why this film stands the test of time of just being like, we're gonna tackle something that you don't want to watch, and I'm not gonna make it in a way where it's like, this is fun to watch.
Well, it's compelling to watch though. Like I
Very
watch this
much.
film often. It's a film that I don't find I have a hard time revisiting just
Mhm.
because it sucks you right in. Which, you know, I mean, I'm not even really like a true crime kind of person. Like I don't like sordid stuff that much. I know some people love like the serial killer podcast and some people really
Yeah.
into like every Netflix documentary. And I have a hard time with that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, Vengeance is Mine, the Imamura film, or like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. Like those are films like I almost can't bring
Yeah.
myself to watch again just because like I remember, yeah, I watched a bunch of Imamura films for a podcast once and it like ruined my month.
Yeah.
So but
Fair.
this one, I think again, because it doesn't directly show those things, and just how it tells the story makes it easy for me to revisit and rewatch. And
Mm-hmm.
it's never a film that's that far from my mind. I'm also really impressed with how to approach the portrayal and the psychology of the killer. Like, that
Mm-hmm.
feels very modern to me. You think at this time a lot of people still thought that a serial killer had to be some kind of like raving lunatic. I think this idea that the serial killer is somebody who could be outwardly normal and not conspicuous, and even not necessarily somebody who wants to do these things but has a compulsion. I think like that whole aspect is really fascinating and feels really true. I watched that interview, the last interview with Jeffrey Dahmer, and just like some of the things he
Mm-hmm.
says reminds me of the things said in M. And it feels like there is just a real respect for psychological truth and exploring what a child killer would be like. And I think partly because of that, like, you can actually empathize with the killer in this movie. I do. Maybe other people don't, or maybe other people don't want to admit that they do. But like, when Peter Lorre's running for his life, trying to hide, and he's got that knife, and he's so desperate, like, I'm kind of on his side. Like, it's terrible to say, but like, I always think like it's kind of fun when movies have you rooting for something that's totally immoral or amoral. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Doctor Strangelove. I mean, I know that's different. That's a comedy, but like, yeah, I'm kind of, I like all those guys in the airplane. I'm kind of rooting for them to destroy the world, just to see them finish their mission. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little like that. Like, you're just kind of on his side. And, I feel bad for him when he's talking about, just sort of falling under the power of his own compulsions. You can empathize with him while still recognizing that what he does is monstrous and terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's kind of the dilemma of what to do with somebody like that, where, you have that whole trial scene. I mean, people often call it the kangaroo court scene. And I think Lang called it a kangaroo court himself, because I guess, the idea is that it's not a fair trial. But I'm always kind of impressed with the criminals putting on this trial, where it seems like they do kind of want to get to the truth somehow. And, they give him a lawyer, and they
Mm-hmm.
do discuss it. And, maybe it's not completely impartial, but yeah, I always think that justice, like, as a concept, it's not something that exists in the natural world. It's something that people have to inflict on the world. It's something that you have to create. It's a human concept. And, I think justice isn't necessarily something that you can get when you talk about like getting justice. I think some justice is something that you strive for. And I'm always one aspect of the film I really love is this whole idea of like the police being incompetent,
Yeah.
and that it's the criminal underground that has to come together and work
Mm-hmm.
together to find justice, and like in their own way, they're trying to be just. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's that wonderful moment when the police finally get to the trial, and you just see everyone's hands go up. It's actually pretty funny. Like, there's a couple funny moments in this movie too, I should
Yeah.
say. Like, I think there's a couple little sight gags, like the person who's pretending to be blind who lifts up
Yeah.
the glasses to look. Or I think it's the police inspector when the guy comes in and says like, it's the Kindermörder, and the cigarette just falls out of his mouth like it's a joke from a Buster Keaton movie or something. Like, it's actually funny. So I think little touches like that, the humor in it, just keeps it from being like
Mm-hmm.
too bleak, I guess.
Yes.
But yeah, like, I always love this idea of the criminals working together to try to get some form of justice. And ultimately it's interrupted, and the police
Mm-hmm.
get him before they can do something uh maybe wrong. And but then just like ending on that note of like, yeah, but this doesn't bring the children back, is such a great way to kind of further complicate things and leave you with that sort of sour feeling.
I know.
Which I think I heard that's ending was cut off in some of the versions of the film. It just kind of ends some of the prints with the police putting their hand on Peter Lorre, like that kind of
Oh yeah.
shot where, yeah, I think Lang said that some versions cut that very end off, but I always like that end, and she's like, but what about the children?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about that because that was one of
Yeah.
my points. There's a couple of things that you mentioned. I do want to talk about after this Peter Lorre, who's as an
Mhm.
actor. It'll be a bit of an aside, because he obviously never worked with Fritz Lang again. But before that, with the ending, so there's a lot of people have read in their thoughts on the ending. I remember the first, maybe even each time I watch this, I feel a little frustration for the police coming in. And but I do think it's a good ending, and I think it
Yeah.
fits the story of the balance. And what I do wanna talk about this in the 3rd segment because my point is in his interest in exploring the psychology of his characters more so than their actual acts. But I think it's the balance of we see the parents, the mothers specifically saying,
Mhm.
you know, "My child is gone." And then we see him actually get a lawyer who is doing his best to
Yeah.
defend him. And then we see the police come in, the AKA the justice system coming in to the situation. So you get a balance. It's not just him saying, it could have ended on them killing him.
Mhm.
And I feel like audiences probably would be like, "No, he
Yeah.
deserved it." But I don't think he's a vindictive person like this, reading a lot of his interviews, and he wants to show the balance of, well, who is it to say that you should kill this human being?
Yeah, I think when the lawyer is speaking and saying that, you know, how can you put a person to death for
Mhm.
something that they can't control? I think, that's a little bit Lang speaking through the character. I know he talked about how he saw the film as being against the death penalty, but then you have other people who watched the film and thought it was pro death penalty, that like, it was actually the police
Yeah.
interfering with justice at the end, so I can see how somebody would take two different things away from that. I'm not necessarily sure it's totally clear cut one way or the other.
Yeah. Which is great. I think that's
Yeah,
why it's again, that ending is something that hits people, and it
yeah.
hits a lot of people differently because I know how I usually feel, where I feel frustrated, like I said, that the police show up, but I also appreciate that
Mhm.
the way he went about it. I don't think it's a bad ending at all. Even if this is a real life situation, I would be like, "Get out of here." Let him get what
Sure.
he deserves, but that's just me also, my internal rage and my own personal
Mhm.
rage that other people might not share and who would be more, open to being like, "Hey, this person can't help their
Personally,
behaviors."
like, I'm against the death penalty, but probably not for the same reasons that a lot of people are against the death penalty.
Mhm.
I think like some people talk about the sanctity of human life,
Yeah.
and that's not really how I feel about
Yeah.
it. I'm like, well, everybody dies, but
Yeah.
I almost feel like it's more for me that I don't think the state should have the right to take somebody's life.
Mhm.
Is sort of my feelings on it. I know it's not this way anymore, but for a long time, like in Czechoslovakia, the max sentence you could get was 25 years
Mhm.
or death. There was no life in prison because like the life in prison was considered inhumane, not
Mm.
executing somebody, which I always thought was like an interesting take on it. I think there's a film that came out a couple of years ago about the last woman who got the death penalty in Czechoslovakia, Olga Hepnarova, I think. But that's a really interesting film too. And I don't know if she really had that haircut, but in the movie she looks just like Louise Brooks
Oh,
that
yeah.
hangs. And I don't know. You might like that movie. It's all in black and white. It's sort of retro, but you know, bring up Louise Brooks. I always think also of from around this time, G.W. Pabst's
Mhm.
Pandora's Box,
Yeah.
which also, it's not as focused on the murder aspect, but it has basically Jack the Ripper show up at the end, the serial killer. And that's also like a very interesting portrayal of a serial killer where he's more like a Ted Bundy type where he's outwardly handsome and, she's charmed by him and she sees him as kind. And like, he's also just got this like murderous compulsion. So it's kind of interesting. Those came out around the same time. And, Pandora's Box, it's like, I think 2 years before.
Yeah,
But,
is it? We did that
Yeah.
one in the film club too. So I've only seen it the one time, but it
Mhm.
was very interesting.
Yeah.
I definitely need to watch more of his work and more of hers because that might
Yeah.
have been the only time I've seen her.
Pabst gets like a little, not a shout out, but like there's a shot in M where he's walking by a bunch of posters for GW Pabst's what's it called? Western Front
Oh yeah.
1918. Yeah. So there's like a little, I feel like it's a Pabst shout out or something like
I
that.
love that.
That
I love when directors do that. When you see a poster for anything, or it's like on
yeah.
a marquee of.
But what you're saying before about like how it kind of balances those elements in
Mhm.
M of the parents, the victims, the police, the investigators, I feel like, every crime film sense kind of has those basic elements that it just proportions differently, where you have like either the anti-hero investigator or the police investigator, the victim or the criminal, with their life and their psychology. And like, a lot of films just focus on the investigator part and, the victims or the complexities of the criminal, the killer sometimes get overlooked. And I
Mhm.
feel like this film just balances all those elements really well. It doesn't feel like it tips its hand too strongly to any one element. I
Way.
feel like, you know, you can kind of say that Peter Lorre is the main character because, there's only one killer and there's multiple victims and multiple investigators. But, it feels like a big kind of ensemble type film as far as showing something that's a social problem that does fall onto this one character who's a killer.
Again, because as you mentioned, like the people who are leading this investigation, who and the police think they're leading it, but they're
Mhm.
not. They're also criminals in their own right. But
Right?
if you're gonna,
They're like busting up places and
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that the whole scene, even when they're searching for him in that whole building, is shot so well, and when he's hiding in, behind like I don't know,
It's
some
tough.
people's stuff. It's so good, and like
Yeah.
I think it ties to what you were saying, where it's not that you feel sorry for him, but you're still kind of like on edge of like,
Yeah.
is he gonna be able to get away or are they gonna catch him? How are they gonna do it? Because it's just shot so beautifully. But we got to talk about Peter Lorre
Of course.
because we've obviously mentioned him a few times here. At this point, Peter Lorre wasn't a star.
I think this was his first film, right?
Exactly, and Fritz would
Yeah.
said he didn't. He specifically was like, "I also don't want a star for this," which is the
Yeah.
best move to go because having a star play this character is going to take you out of, and what whoever might have played him might not be a star to us now, but would have
Mhm.
maybe been a star then. It's going to take you out of the moment. It takes someone very talented to make you believe that they're or most I feel like most big stars probably just don't want to play a character like this for fear of being just only seen this way or typecast. Most of us who watch a variety of movies have seen Peter Lorre through the years as he made his move to America, and he sometimes played weirdos, but he never played a character like this.
I feel like a lot of times, like, he'll play, like, sleazy characters or
Yeah.
disreputable characters, but not necessarily, like, horrible people, you know? Like, for me, like, I kinda think of his signature role being in, Casablanca, like, "Rick, Rick, you gotta help me," like, somebody sort
Yeah.
of desperate, and, I think, like, a lot of the characteristics that make his performance in M great kinda carry over to
Mhm.
those performances, but, yeah, like, he's not really there's something about him that does seem too empathetic to really cast as always playing killers and, he does play a lot of bad guys, like, I mean, I think before he makes it to America, he does Man Who Knew Too Much for Hitchcock, right?
Mhm.
And, he does Mad Love and he does play other nasty characters, but I don't like, I also think about him from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and stuff like that too. He's not necessarily always playing awful characters, or even in something like Maltese Falcon, I think, like, there's definitely layers to his performance that make it interesting, so
Yeah, I feel like he and I think it's just a testament, obviously, to his ability to craft himself into something because he's not your conventional looking actor, especially not even just of the time, even today. He has a very specific look that he's not going to be cast as like the leading. man in a romance, but he's still going to be very important to the story. And I think a lot of people, I know for sure, whenever I see Peter Lorre in the cast, I'm like hyped to see him. And I feel like last year I was doing a lot of the Roger Corman stuff,
Oh,
and
yeah,
I,
him hanging out with Vincent Price, and
yeah,
have you
and
seen,
those are great.
have you seen Comedy of Terrors?
Oh my God, yes, so that's what to talk about because I actually love that movie. I
Yeah,
actually genuinely
Boris
find it funny.
Karloff, Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, like, that's a trifecta.
It's
That's
so good, and I think people sleep on it, and it's also Jacques Tourneur who did that
yeah,
film.
that's a
I
fun
think it's
one.
slept
People
on,
should see that. Yeah.
and especially because it's one of those movies I don't know, it's just a personal thing. I don't often laugh out loud when I watch movies. It takes something very funny, and that movie had me laughing throughout the movie, so that's just a small shout out to Comedy of Terrors. I
Yeah,
think it's people think it's gonna be silly, and it is silly, but in a good way. It's nice to see those 3 big heads together and
yeah.
being silly.
I think he did well, they're also in is it all 3 of them also in The Raven? I feel like it yeah, yeah. Were those shot on the same I feel like that's gotta be a Roger Corman thing, right? Shooting them back to back?
Yeah,
Were they unrelated? I don't know.
I don't
Anyway,
know.
it's just fun, like, that you're seeing that combination of actors. I think he did more than one with, Roger Corman, but I can't remember off the top of my head. There's a whole
The
bunch of them.
other one, Tales of Terror.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
But it is kind of funny, like you said, both Peter Lorre and Fritz Lang made it to Hollywood, but they never made a film again together, which is kind of
Mhm,
I don't know if it's a shame, it feels like
mhm.
they probably could have. Maybe they didn't want to, or maybe it just didn't work out. I know Hollywood, like, sometimes you sign up for a studio and you go and do, what you're contracted to do. I know, like, early on, Peter Lorre, he was under contract. I think it was through is it Paramount doing those, like, awful Mr. Moto movies? I know, like,
Oh,
Peter
yeah.
Lorre hated doing those. He's playing this, like, Japanese spy character, and he
Someone
did
was
not
telling me about this recently. I haven't seen them, and I completely
they're bad. He hated doing them. He was like, "Get me out of this contract."
oh my god, there's so many here.
There's a
I
whole
didn't even
bunch.
see.
It was like a big yeah, I don't but I think he was under contract for that, and
Oh my
yeah, that's
gosh,
just how it worked out, but
that's that's hilarious. I'm looking at his filmography right now. I'm like, wow, that's a lot to get through. That's shocking.
but I feel like, you can see why M made his career because
Mhm,
it's such a powerful performance. It's such a difficult character to portray, and he I think brings an honesty to it, and I think he does make the character empathetic without undercutting the horror of what he does. I mean, one of my favorite bits of acting, it's like his sort of confession moment, and I love how, like, we talked about all the fancy camera work. The camera just stays on him. I think it only ever, like, tilts up and down to just kind of keep up with his face. But when he's confessing, and there's the moment where he talks about killing, and, like, he sort of loses himself in that thought, and his eyes roll up in his head, and he's doing this sort of thing with his mouth where, like, you just see his bottom teeth, and
mhm,
he makes himself look monstrous, and you see the kind of awful pleasure that he's wrapped up in, and, like, it's really horrifying, and, it's such an interesting moment, coming from this character who's, like, so in a lot of ways, like, meek and
mhm.
pathetic, Well, I always think, like, the way he's kind of, like, squirming on the ground, and he's pathetic, but, like, you just get that little glimpse of this awful child killer, and the kind of that side of him, just a tiny hint of it, and that's really powerful. He doesn't overdo it at all. It's just what you need.
Yeah, that's a difficult role to
Yeah,
do, especially at the beginning of your career. I can't even imagine the pressure he must have felt to be like, "This is how the public is gonna see me right off the bat." But
yeah,
again, that's again a testament to him as an actor. I
yeah,
don't think people like him a lot, but I don't think people give him enough credit outside of M for his acting ability. At least I don't see it as often. People just say that, they love Peter Lorre, but he put on great performances throughout his career. Um, I'm gonna shift quickly to the second segment, and we'll go back to talking about M. We'll talk about what he did briefly talk about what he did right before and after, and here are some maybe truths and maybe not truths of what he says happened in these films or through the release of these films. But M is 1931. What he does right before this is Woman in the Moon, which is 1929. And I just watched this one for the first time.
Okay.
It looks beautiful.
It's I mean, it does it's a really cool piece of science fiction for the time period, and I feel like if anyone ever asks you like why Nazis were so obsessed with rockets, all you have to do is show them Woman in the Moon.
Yeah.
But in some ways it's dated now that we have been to the moon, but
Yeah.
when you think about like, oh, that was made all the way back in 1929, it's pretty impressive all the details that came up with, and especially like the zero gravity
Mhm.
parts, and I think it doesn't stand the test of time in the way that M does, but it's fascinating for the time period, and it's sort of an important film in context of history and science fiction.
It's weird to me watching it that it's not more talked about because I didn't really know much about it before I started doing research on him and being like, "Okay, this is the one." So I try and watch the before and afters, if I have access to them, and why it's not talked about in the same vein as Metropolis.
Yeah,
Metropolis is its own thing, obviously. I know it's huge and incredibly important, but I think this is a really well done
yeah.
film.
Can I say Metropolis? Can I say something controversial about
Okay.
Metropolis? All right. Every couple of years, they found a little bit more footage for it, and the movie got a little bit longer, and it got a little bit less mysterious and a little bit more boring to me. So
That's
I,
fair.
I kind of feel like I actually kind of liked it when it was all beat up and short, and you kind of had to fill in some of the gaps yourself, because like seeing everything laid out, like I feel like people forget that Metropolis was kind of a giant flop when it came out. It
Yeah.
was a really expensive movie, and people were like, What is this? This is boring." And, when you hear that at first, you're like, "Oh, that's crazy." Like, it's the movie with the robot and the giant, like, Moloch machine and amazing
Mhm.
city miniatures and flying
Mhm.
airplanes going around, and then you watch, like, the complete Metropolis, like the one Kino put out, and it's like, "Yeah, I get it." So, that's my feeling on Metropolis now. Like, some of the movies similar with, Nosferatu, like, I love Nosferatu, but I feel
Mhm.
like, watching the cleanup version where, it's all restored and you can see, like, the bald cap on Max Schreck, I'm like, I kinda wanna go back to, like, the creepy version with all the scratches on the film print and the jump frame, the missing frames. I'm like, that was creepier. And I'm not usually somebody who, I know some people go crazy about the, like, 35 millimeter
Yeah.
film scan off of a beat up print. Isn't this amazing? And it's like, it's Toy Story. Get over it. So I, I think sometimes people get a little bit like crazy about that, but
Yeah.
for certain films like Nosferatu or like Metropolis, I'm like, I kind of liked it. I kind of liked it when I saw less of it, and it was more of a mystery, and it felt like this weird artifact from another time period. Because when it's complete and cleaned up, you can kind of watch it like any other movie, and
Mhm.
it starts to show certain faults that you almost wish you didn't see. So,
Yeah. I mean, not to go on a whole aside, but watching a lot more of his silent film, and maybe it's because I watched them a lot back to back. I like there's a lot of fantastic things in this. It would hit even harder if it was shortened.
yeah,
Because it's at some point, it's not even just because it's silent. At some point, it's just like, okay, get to the point. I don't think because I watched the two, part one and two of
the Nibelungen.
that and Doctor
Yeah.
Mabuse, and I was like, "Okay, I think I need to watch something completely."
I mean, I love the Nibelung, but it's like Lord of the Rings, you kind of have to, like, set aside the whole
Yes,
weekend to watch it, like, longer than the runtime because you gotta, like, pace yourself, I feel like.
I know.
It's a whole
I was
event,
like, "I need to take a break, to get some snacks." Great films, but
Um,
again,
even like Spies, Spione, it's, it's a long movie, like, it feels like it should be a 78-minute movie, and it's, like, almost 3 hours long,
I know.
you know? I mean, what we were saying before about the whole Nazi thing, I think you can make a much better case that Testament of Dr. Mabuse is critical of the Nazi regime. I think, like, that's kind of the right time period, and,
Mhm.
you can definitely read more into that. I think there's a much better case for Testament of Dr. Mabuse being about the rise of Nazism and the sort of cult of personality around Hitler and all of that. Yeah.
And that's what he does right after M.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, like you right there, that's pretty much all I want to give because I don't want to give too much away about the film if people haven't seen it. But it was definitely read that way, and he says that it was banned by
Yeah.
the German party. And even though that happened, he was asked to be, the leading filmmaker for the party
Yeah.
later on, and he declined and left Germany
Mhm.
for France, and he goes on to, after that, make one French film, Lilium.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, he makes the one,
Yeah.
which I still haven't seen that one, so
I
that's one of the
haven't seen
last
that one
ones.
either. That's one of the gaps. I don't know if there's an easy way to see it.
I
Maybe.
know, I think that's why I've been
Yeah.
trying to find. I'm like, I don't know, maybe someone has put it weirdly on, like, YouTube somewhere. Uh,
Probably.
Someone's probably, or on some Russian, streaming
Yeah.
site
Yeah.
that
I'm always worried I'm going to get like spyware or something going on those sites.
sometimes I then I'm like, "You know what? Let them spy." Is it just gonna be like this girl just sits there watching these movies by herself?
Watching Fritz Lang movies.
'Cause I watched some of the older Douglas Sirk ones that were hard to find, like, you could not find a print anywhere, but they had it,
Yeah.
and I was like, "You know what? Let them spy if they want. They're giving me something, I'll give them something." I'm not giving them much,
Yeah.
but but yes, he so that's the last film he does in Germany, and then he goes on to make one French film, and then that's when he makes his move to America, making the films that most people probably know of outside of, like, Metropolis and M. I don't know that a lot of people have seen his silent work,
Mhm.
outside of Metropolis probably is maybe the only silent film, like, the average film goer might have seen. I don't even know if
I know,
that's
like,
true. If
Destiny got a good Blu-ray release a couple of years ago. It's a little like, oh gosh, what's the D.W. Griffith movie?
Is it Intolerance?
Intolerance. Thank you. It's sort of like Fritz Lang's Intolerance, Destiny. Yeah, after his Hollywood movies, he's a pretty good run in Hollywood.
Mhm.
I think Fury, I heard that he had a hard time shooting it because the movie cost way more than Joseph L. Mankiewicz wanted to spend on it. Lang was just going like over budget and getting opulent, and like I think he might have been basically fired during the editing process. And then the movie came out and made a pile of money and was like a big hit. And they were like, you're back, Lang." So, if that
Classic.
went badly, he might not have had the Hollywood career that he did. But he had, quite a few films in Hollywood. I
Mhm.
think, some are more remarkable than others, but there's some good stuff in there. There's Ministry of Fear and Scarlet Street, and
I'm glad that you mentioned Ministry of Fear because a lot
yeah,
of people don't love that movie. I love that movie.
I like Ministry of Fear.
That
Um,
I'm covering
yeah,
it on the
yeah.
show too because I was like, I have to.
That was, if you had said somebody had taken M, that was probably in the next one I was
Oh
gonna
yeah?
go
Okay.
to. So yeah,
Now I'm glad because some
um,
people think it's, I don't know, they think it's a little messy, and I know that he himself, I mean, I'll talk about this on the show
mhm,
too, that episode, but, he didn't get as much creative freedom with that one, so he didn't love it, but I just love Ray Milan,
yeah. No, I
so
think that's fair. I mean, Hangman Also Die is one I think about a lot because it's kind of like the confluence of a lot of really talented people, and it's
Mhm,
about a true story that I care a lot about.
mhm.
You get like Fritz Lang directing and Brecht writing and Wexley doing touch-ups, and it's James Wong Howe as the cinematographer, and it's about killing Hydric, and the film's not very good.
Yeah,
It's like such a weird thing that yeah.
I feel like maybe I should I mean, eventually, I would like to give it a second watch. I remember watching it being like, "This just seems a little bit all over the place." I'm not
It is,
used to
yeah.
that with the films that he does.
The whole, like, backstory of it's really interesting. I kinda think it was, like, Lang, you know it's his attempt at doing something patriotic,
Yeah.
but, like, there's some weird things if you read about, like, the production history, like, it's kinda funny, like, Brecht, wanted to put in a scene of, showing the Germans mistreating Jewish people,
Mhm.
and, Lang took it out because he said, "Oh, like, Americans don't wanna see that." So I think like maybe he was a little bit too conflicted between, the way the story probably should have been told and him trying to appeal to an American audience. Some of the casting is kind of weird too in that one. And it's a story that's been told by other filmmakers. I mean, Douglas Sirk did his own version around the same time. He did Hitler's Madman.
Hmm.
Um, there's been quite a few versions since. I think the best one it's from the '60s. It's called Attentat by Yoshi Sequins. And one thing that's kind of great about that version, I think like Sequins basically, he's not considered like a great director. He was considered like kind of, journeyman director, but he sort of said, I'm not the auteur of the story. History is the auteur. I'm just kind of get out of the way of putting any of my own themes or symbols, and I'm just going to let the history speak for itself because it already has themes and symbols and these
Yeah.
sorts of things. And I think that's one reason why that one works so well. But like, there's been, more recently there was Anthropoid, which wasn't bad, by Sean Ellis, and it's the one with Cillian Murphy and Jamie Dornan.
Oh, I
That
haven't
one's all
seen that
right.
one.
Yeah, no, it's not bad actually. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's all kind of the same event that the Hangman Also Dies based on. Great title too, I gotta say. Hangman Also Dies, just like a fantastic title.
That's why
Apparently
I was so
was
excited.
apparently uh the title was I think it wasn't even like Lang's secretary. It was just like somebody working in the studio office who just she said, "Oh, why don't you call it Hangman Also Die?" And they're like, "That's the best title I've ever heard." So
Good for
I
her.
think they said like she got like a prize or something, or they gave her like $100. I forget
Oh,
what
nice.
for coming up with the title, but it was just like some secretary. Anyway, but
That's so
yeah,
funny.
that's sort of for me. That's a frustrating one because I feel like it should be really really great, and it's not.
I
So
know. It's unfortunate
yeah,
with that one. But everyone has to have, I guess, have some duds here and there.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call them a dud, but I would say like Western Union is unremarkable. There's some. It's a Randolph Scott Western, like that's fine, but it's coming from Fritz Lang, it sort of feels like you like
Yeah.
you can skip that one. There's a couple films like that, or I'm just looking at his filmography now. He did American Gorilla in the Philippines. These sort of Tyrone Powers movie. Um,
Great title there also.
not as good as Hangman Also Die, American Gorilla in the Philippines. Got a terrible ring to it, but so, like not everything he did was a masterpiece. I think a lot of it was just kind of, and that's fine. Like sometimes you go to work, and at that point he was a little bit older. That's like 30 years into his career. So
Yeah, that's kind of what he did before and after, and we kind of just talked about a little bit of his American career, which is relevant because the other films that we're covering on the in the series will be his American work. So I'm glad that we got at least one German film in,
mhm.
and it's, I mean, you can't really beat to be honest.
I mean, again, talking about like the length of some of his earlier movies. I mean, it's not exactly like a shorter film. It's like hour and 10 minutes. It's close-ish to 2 hours, but it moves fast.
Yes.
I feel like again, that's something that feels really modern about it is the pacing is very effective. I would say much more so than a lot of his other movies. You know, Again, some of them like Metropolis, I don't even know if it's how correct the restoration is. If sometimes they
Mhm.
like find footage and it's like, well, we found it. It's got to go back in the movie. And I'm like, would that have been
Like
trimmed
where?
or what, I don't always know, I mean, there's people who know that movie inside and out, so they probably
Yeah.
would know. But sometimes I watch things like that and I'm like, is this correct? I don't know. Um, I just think, it feels very focused. It has things to say without being didactic. It's powerful. It's gripping. I think it's his best film. Yeah.
I mean, I would be hard pressed to disagree with that. I think it's a fantastic film and sort of wrap things up our thoughts and get into the third segment. There is one trademark that I want to talk about, and we'll talk about our last thoughts on the film. But one that you mentioned closer up to the top, and we kind of touched upon, but just going a little deeper in the context of not just even M, but his other films that we've mentioned, some maybe we haven't mentioned, but his interest in exploring the psychology of his characters as opposed to the actions that they do, because he does have a lot of crime happen in his films, even in the American films, or criminals who are at the forefront of his stories. It's very rare that we get to see the actions they commit, especially in M. We don't see him commit any actions at all. It's just implied. But I think what makes his films so relevant and rewatchable is because it's the exploration of the character's mind and how we as modern audiences, again, almost 100 years later or 50 years later, if we're thinking about his stuff in the 40s and 50s, how we can still watch it without having to have the context of the time that it's in. It just
Yeah.
feels fresh. A lot of his film, not all of them do feel fresh, but I feel like something like M feels
Yeah.
fresh.
Like, we were saying in contrast to something like Woman in the Moon, it's like, okay, here's what we knew about the science of the time period, and here's where culture was with rocketry. And, like, you have
Mhm.
to explain it a little bit to get something out of that movie, I feel like.
Yeah.
Um, or again, like Denis Villeneuve, I would say that's like probably a bigger artistic accomplishment than M, but it's very, there's a specificity to it that I think needs a little bit of context. And
Mhm.
M, it's just leaner, meaner little film. I totally love it, and I think it's probably more influential than some people realize. Like, I think a
Mhm.
lot of crime films that have come since owe at least something to M. It's been remade directly by Joseph Losey, and the
Yeah.
remake's not bad actually. I
I was
like
gonna
the
ask if
remake.
you've seen it.
Yeah, it's
I like
good. Yeah,
it's not Fritz Lang's M,
no,
but I think
it's
it's Joseph Losey's M. I know it
yeah.
sounds, like, obvious to say, but I'm also a huge Joseph Losey fan.
Same here. I like Joseph Losey a lot, and I think it's good.
I was
Um,
shocked. I was scared to watch it. When I finally put it on, I was like, "You know what? Thank God." It could have gone really badly.
I mean, there's some films, like Tenderness of Wolves. I watched last night just because I was thinking about
Mhm.
M, and it's not exactly a remake, but it's sort of inspired by similar. Well, it partly inspired by one of the killers that M is inspired by,
Mhm.
and it is heavily influenced by M. Like, I think it's directed by Uli Lommel, and he said that he wasn't setting out to like replicate M, but he was influenced by it, obviously. And, it has the homage with the ball rolling from the little girl,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that's of course referenced in Gyorgy Fehir's Twilight, not the Kirsten Stewart Twilight, the Hungarian Twilight. Like, almost that same shot exactly, I think, is in Twilight. Yeah, Tenderness of Wolves is really good. I feel like that's
I
one
haven't seen
people should
this one
probably see.
yet.
It's, Fassbender produced it, he didn't direct it, but he has, like, a small part in it, and a bunch of his regular actors show up in
Yeah.
it, and, Kurt Raab plays the killer, and he's really great in it. He's, he looks so much like Peter Lorre, not so much in M, but, like, he's got the shaved head, he looks like Peter Lorre from Mad Love.
Oh, okay.
But he's fantastic in the film. Great cast and, really grisly movie. I mean, I've even seen M homaged in stuff like the Dennis the Menace movie. I was thinking when, Christopher Lloyd's, peeling the orange or the apple, I think it is, with the knife, I'm like, "Oh, that's right out of M." Um, the Nick Castle, Dennis the Menace, I actually like that one a lot. But, I've seen it homaged a couple of times, but I feel like it's just kind of woven into the DNA of crime cinema now. It's all over film noir and everything that's kind of come after it. So
Hard not to see, and every time I watch this, I'm like, "If I ever make a movie, I'm gonna just, like, outwardly rip
yeah,
some of the imagery of this."
some of the shots are too good not to. I mean, Hitchcock obviously I think was
Yes.
influenced by it. Not just by taking Peter Lorre for. He worked with Peter Lorre more than once, so more than Fritz Lang. Yeah, Hitchcock. I think Hitchcock was also kind of influenced by some of Lang's earlier movies.
I think in the style of storytelling for sure, and I've read him specifically say that he is he was influenced by him a lot.
I heard a story about Sergei Eisenstein meeting Fritz Lang, I think after Metropolis came out. And Fritz Lang didn't know who he was. And he was just like, watch my movies closely and you'll learn how to make a movie someday. And it's like, I think Eisenstein had already finished shooting Battleship Potemkin. He's like, uh-huh. So I
That's
thought
so
that was
funny.
cute.
Oh my
I think
gosh.
there's like a picture
Wow.
of them together somewhere, but
That's so funny. Wow. Every time I hear the word Battleship Potemkin, it brings me right back to school.
I think we've
Being a
talked about this
teenager.
before maybe on the show about like how many times we saw it in school. Like I feel like I got like sick of it because it was just too many
I
times.
haven't seen it since then. I should now. I think I can.
I think, yeah, I should rewatch it now. I think I've seen like the Odessa step sequence
Yes.
too many times. It just kind of ruined it for me. There's and like, and I love Eisenstein, so it's sort of too bad.
Oh gosh, that's the play. Anytime I work with a young person, it doesn't happen as much anymore. But who are like, oh, I'm thinking of going to film school. I'm like, okay, be prepared. You're gonna watch that sequence a lot, and you're gonna be mad about it at some point. At some point, the first time, second, third, you're gonna be amazed.
Yep. Yep.
After that, you're gonna be like, we get it. Maybe let's show us many other films that have been made.
It's easier to think of like classes where I didn't see it shown
Yeah.
than ones that I was. So yeah.
What a time.
Was it second year, the first day we watched in one of the classes, the first day was Man Bites Dog?
Yes, Man by
And then
Dog.
like I
Yes.
think there were some walkouts and
Yep. I talk about that all the time and how honestly I have so much respect for her just
yeah,
being like, I'm not gonna give you any context. Let's just watch the
let's
movie.
just watch this.
The silence in the air was so thick.
Yeah.
We were all traumatized. And then she's like, "Hey, let's have a discussion after." I was like, "What? I need to go home." There were people who walked out and I was like, "Okay, the movie's actually not that long." But it was a lot. I talk about this with people all the time.
Like I remember and sometimes the timing of the class does not lend itself to certain movies. Like I
I
remember
know.
Teresa Barta showed our class Come and See at like 9:30 in the morning. And like the rest of my day was just like I'm like, I'm skipping everything I have after this. I'm just gonna go home and lay in my bed.
Oh
It
god.
was like my day's done. Like there's nothing to do after watching Come and See.
Oh, gosh. I'll never forget because this is back then when you would be, like, deathly ill and you would still go to class.
Yeah.
At least to me because I never wanted to skip any of the film classes. I'd skip all the other classes, but not my film classes. When we watched the film history, Birth of a Nation, I was so sick, and the teacher said, "Oh, we'll take a, intermission," and I think he just said that so people wouldn't leave and would be waiting, and I was waiting for the intermission, and I was dying, and we were packed in the little room, and I was just like, "This is rough."
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. That's the only time I've seen it also.
I remember like I showed up sick to class a couple times. I think there was one time I brought like a big pillow with me and just kind of laid on it. And you know what we watched when I had the pillow with me? Battleship Potemkin.
Nice,
So I
nice.
remember that.
That's so funny. Wow, those are good times.
I also just wanted to mention I love all the faces in the movie. It's got like
Yes.
one of the greatest collection of like faces in a single movie ever, I think. So many interesting looking people and Peter Lorre chief among them, but like literally everyone in the trial scene, the police investigators, all the all the guys sitting around tables with mustaches drinking, like everyone looks great, and it's just, I think as a film, it captures that chaos and desperation, but also excitement and energy of the Weimar era in a way, it feels like it's maybe, one of the last great films of that era. Have you seen the silent version of Berlin Alexanderplatz?
Mm-mm.
Okay, that might be a good one to pair with M if people want a recommendation for something that, is
Well, that
similar,
that
but
ties
that
into
not
the
as
next
simple.
question there.
Oh, okay.
That was the last question. I don't know if that was your pairing. It can be.
Okay.
But I was gonna ask what you would pair if you're making a double bill with M, what you would pair this with. It doesn't have to be a double bill, but one you'd recommend.
There's like, you know, closer, more similar films, like, you could watch M and the remake of M or M and Tender Disciples, but I think like
Mhm.
Berlin Alexander Platz and M would make a really good double bill.
Yeah.
Or same with I think also like Pandora's Box and M would go together really well. I know Pandora's Box, it's almost always like a double bill with Diary of a Lost Girl, but I feel like that would be a fun double bill. Maybe I'll do that myself sometime because I love both of those movies. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I don't even know if I knew there was a silent version of that. So I'll have
it's
to
on
check
the
that out.
it's like tucked away on the Criterion DVD box set as like a special feature.
Oh, okay. Because
It's
I'm
like
looking.
I love whenever a special feature is just an entire movie.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's when they
They
made
used
an
to,
effort.
yeah, yeah.
They used to do stuff like that.
But what would you pair M with?
I don't know that I had a hard time with this, but I was like, for some reason, thinking a lot about the 1930s. It's actually the same year, 1931 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Mhm.
The one with Frederick March. And I was like, is it just like visually reminds me of this? But I also think thematically can tie
Yeah.
well together of like, the monster within you, not to sound
Mhm.
corny, but I also just love that movie. I think I love Frederick March. And seeing two actors like that, Peter Lorre, Frederick March and the performances they put on, but also just visually and thematically, I think they would tie well together. And I didn't have to assume that's a shorter movie. So you really could do them back to back. I think they run like the pacing is so good in both of those movies
Yeah.
that it would make for a great, even
I
like
think that's a
a
good one.
Halloween themed
Mhm.
night that you want to do sometime in October. Hopefully you want to do it earlier. But there's a lot of versions of that movies of that story. That's probably my favorite. So that's the one I would recommend. For some reason, that's just what I was thinking of.
I mean, it might also be interesting to pair M with like a more recent film. I was thinking,
Yeah.
it would be interesting to watch it back to back with something like Memories of a Murder or, that kind of modern day investigating a murderer, serial killer type story.
I always love when
Yeah.
people bring forth a suggestion for a modern film because my mind never goes there. So I'm always like, you know what? Yeah, maybe I should think of something more modern than, something also from the 30s because that's still on my list to watch.
Oh,
I
you
haven't
haven't seen
seen
it
it
yet?
yet.
Okay. I
I
mean,
know I know it's supposed to be really good.
yeah, it's not like super recent. It's probably close to 20 years old now. But,
That's recent in
it,
my brain.
I would say that it's pretty recent, but
It's 2000s,
yeah,
right? Early 2000s?
I think it's early 2000s. And
Yeah,
I sort of feel like
that's a
that's the
modern
film that
film.
like David Fincher was kind of copying his notes for when he was making Zodiac.
Yeah,
Um, I did
not
a
surprised.
tweet a while ago where I'm like, a lot of the praise for David Fincher's Zodiac should just be like forwarded to Memories of Murder. And people got like really mad at me. So
Wow.
I was like, all
He
right, all right.
David Fincher has his shooters still to this day.
He
People
does.
love
I'm
him.
like, he'll just, he can make all the Manx he wants and people are still going to defend him. So
Trust me, that's a whole other tangent, me and David Fincher.
if you ever want to invite me on to complain about Mank, I can do that.
Oh my god, that movie, I was actually like, "This should be great, I love this era."
Yeah.
I halfway through, I was like, "Should I?" Because I refuse to turn movies off, I'll just
Yeah.
skip through it, and I was like, "Should I turn this off?" Because I'm getting mad. Like, it should not be this boring. It just blew my mind that I feel like, did you go out of your way to make the most boring movie of all time? And it's not the most boring movie of all time, but I just was like, you could have made something so good. Ugh. Anyway,
Anyway,
Mank.
my favorite part is like, closing off your Oscar bait movie with Gary Oldman literally waving an Oscar around like, give me one.
Oh my god.
It's also, not to keep complaining about Mank, but like digital black and white looks different than film
Tell
black
me
and white.
about it.
And
I
like,
know. It
you
makes me
can
mad.
really tell in that movie. And like him putting the little cigarette burns in the movie just felt like cutesy nonsense.
Yeah.
And, I think when it came out, somebody posted a side by side with a picture of Tim Burton's Ed Wood. And
Mhm.
just like the look of the black and white film versus the black and white digital in Mank trying to look like film is so
Ugh.
obvious. I'm like, oh, right. Like this movie's hideous. And there's a bunch of stupid stuff in it. It's
I
it's
hate
not a
the
good movie.
digital black and white. I hate it. I'm just
I
like,
mean, it can look good, I think, if you're not trying to make it look like film. I think if you kind of
yes. But
do
sometimes,
your own thing with it, but
again, not to go on a whole tangent. Can't remember. I never remember what this. Oh, Maestro, because I watched
oh,
that
yeah.
and the black and white scenes. I was like, okay, now I'm mad. I was like, what are you doing? What possessed you to do this? I'll never forget the visceral. I like gasped out loud. I was like, what? And I can tolerate a lot, but I was not having it for that. Um,
Maestro, the film that asks, "Can a man truly love his beard?" No. The answer is no.
exactly. Um, that's why we get to talk about films like
Yeah,
actually
people
good
should just
movies.
not listen to us talk about contemporary movies. I like modern movies. There's a lot of modern movies I like.
I know there's more than I gave credit to, but I usually watch them a lot later than when they come
Yeah.
out.
I think you would like Memories of Murder. I think,
I'm sure I would.
yeah.
So it's on the list that definitely need to bump up. But I had a fantastic time talking about a movie that's absolutely fantastic. Sometimes
Mhm.
I feel a little pressure to talk about a movie like this because how do you do it justice? But I think the
Yeah.
way to do it justice is just to bring your own heart to it. Again,
Mhm.
as corny as it sounds, it's just have an honest conversation about how the film affects you. And I think we did a good job
I
at it.
feel good about this. I'm always happy to talk about M, and, I think also when it's a film that other people have talked about, it's not so bad if you don't say everything, I think
Yeah.
sometimes when it's a film that doesn't get talked a lot about, there's that pressure to, like, "I gotta talk about every aspect," and sometimes it's okay to just kind of let that slide, just focus on a few things, so I feel really good about the conversation. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this was fun.
And I before we wrap up, I do want to pass it to you back to you to plug some work that you've done with Deaf Crocodile.
Yes, thank you. Recently, I did some audio commentaries for Deaf Crocodile releases. The 2 latest ones that just came out on Blu-ray and 4K are Hair High, the Bill Plimpton animated movie, and, I talk with, James Hancock and Adam Rakoff on that one, and you can also hear me on the 4K release of Song of the Miraculous Hind by Marcell Jankovics. I'm also on the, Tragedy of Man release, also a film by Marcel Jankovics. It's like a 3-hour-long Hungarian animated movie about the folly of mankind over
Nice.
all of history. Um, and yeah, I'm super excited to be doing these audio commentaries. So if folks want to hear more of me, that's a great place to hear more of me. And it's just looking at my shelf now. There's some other ones. I've got some more in the works. So
Oh,
it's a
nice.
great place to yeah, hear me if you like hearing my voice when I'm talking, words out of my mouth. That's that's it.
A lot of friends of the show are LA based and they are
Mm,
familiar with Deaf Crocodile, so you're gonna actually have people who are listening to the show who know about the label and can seek out this film. So I think that's fantastic that you've gotten that work, and that's just really cool to have.
thanks.
Not even just on your resume to be like, yeah, this is something I've done. So I'll include links to those in the show notes for friends to click on. But um very happy to have you back at some point. I'm sure we'll talk
Sure.
about something fantastic. And I know at some point I'll be on
Pink
Pink
Smoke,
Smoke
yeah.
to talk about Kiss of a Spider Woman.
Yes. Yeah, I'm
So
excited
we'll
for
do
that.
that. So
Yeah,
something to also look out for, and I'll do some cross promotion there. But thanks again. I
thank
appreciate
you.
it. Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia and Ronnie. If you like what you've heard, let us know at seeingfacesinmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesinmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast. And stay tuned for our next episode on The Woman in the Window. Watch more movies, and we'll catch you next time.